Nash.
Am I wrong? Have we just heard from the chair of the, whatever the select committee is that he chairs?
Powerful.
That was. I know it's late, Mr. Speaker. I know he's probably tired. It's probably past his bedtime. But goodness me, that was the most lacklustre speech I think I've heard in this House for a long time. Mr. Speaker, Jonathan Coleman was very lucky because we thought Jonathan's was bad. And then that member stood up, and Jonathan's looked fantastic. His was a piece of oratory art compared to that member. It was outstanding. He sat there. It was a long, low, cold, boring, quiet, monotone about nothing. I mean, you try and listen to some of these speeches because some of these things are actually quite interesting because they're in the national interest. I mean, this is good for New Zealand. It's great for New Zealand. It's not like some of the other bills which are, they're important, but this is good for New Zealand. It's good for trade. It's good for the economy. And the chair of the select committee there, I think he was standing, it was hard to tell, in a low, quiet monotone. It was painful, Mr. Chair. It was painful. And thank God that was over. Thank God when almost at the end of the night it was like pulling nails. But anyway, I do stand in support of this, the Tariff Malaysia Free Trade Agreement Amendment Bill, and this is second reading, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the fourth bill I've spoken on today, which is a Labour bill. It's a Labour bill. This is something that Phil Goff did. This is Bill Sutton's. In fact, this is the second bill. In fact, it's actually the third bill in a row that Labour has done all the work for. Unbelievable. We're in urgency for Labour bills 18 months later. For 18 months later, where is the innovation? They have the nerve to stand there and say Labour did nothing in government. And yet here we are, the third bill in the row, that's a Labour bill. Anyway, back to this bill. This bill amends the Tariff Act 1988. He's come to life. He's come to life. About time. Why didn't you do it 10 minutes ago? Anyway, 5 minutes ago. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, this bill, as I was saying, amends the Tariff Act 1988 in order to implement the Malaysia-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement signed in Kuala Lumpur last October. The bill's amendment will allow for transitional safeguard measures to be applied in appropriate circumstances to imports from Malaysia. That member has no right to criticise anyone's speeches, and yet he's sitting there. It's unbelievable. Someone send him the YouTube or whatever it's showing and show him how bad it was. I think he needs a few lessons anyway. But anyway, Malaysia is a large and growing population of more than 28 million people, and it presents ample opportunities for additional trade, investment and other economic linkages. But, Mr. Speaker, we all know that if New Zealand is to develop sustainable economic growth, then it must follow a policy of export-led growth like that promoted with this agreement. And it must work to foster an economic environment where key competencies around export strategy are encouraged in any way, shape or form. Mr. Speaker, Mr. English has stated that it's his government's goal to drive an export-led recovery. And I quote, "We are looking for how to make sure we get sustainable export-led recovery." That was Mr. English. But Mr. Speaker, in my view, there are three things that are holding back companies in New Zealand from optimising their export growth in countries that we have free trade agreements with, like Malaysia, like this bill fosters. The government's actions are increasingly sub-optimising any chance New Zealand has of increasing its economic growth through further development of the export sector into countries like Malaysia, where this free trade agreement is about. The three things holding back New Zealand, Mr. Speaker, are one, a lack of affordable capital, two, a lack of true export competency, and three, an outdated monetary policy. Now, let me expand on these a little bit more, Mr. Speaker. The first one, the lack of affordable capital. Mr. Hayes, you may learn something. You might have been in foreign affairs for a long time, but you did absolutely nothing. It took Labour to come in here to negotiate all the free trade agreements that have been passed since that government's been in the House. Phil Goff and Jim Sutton, every single free trade agreement that's been passed under that government, Phil Goff and Jim Sutton did. So how dare that member sit there like a big oaf going on about, Labour does nothing. They were all done by Labour, and you know it, Mr. Hayes. Anyway, lack of affordable capital. Mr. Speaker, only 10% of all business loans are unsecured in this country. This means that 90% of all loans are secured against the assets of the owner of the company, often the family home. This attitude and access to capital will never allow the country to address the issue that we overvalue capital and undervalue labour in this country. Basically, this means that we prefer to employ cheap labour rather than spend money on capital in order to improve productivity. So my question is, how can New Zealand companies wanting to expand to take advantage of the New Zealand-Malaysia Free Trade Agreement access affordable capital to expand? Investment in capital does not, in fact, lead to less jobs, but rather greater efficiencies, more jobs as companies grow, and more importantly, a greater propensity to scale up for export growth into countries like Malaysia, which is what we're talking about at the moment. It is fundamental if the vast majority of companies are to take advantage of this New Zealand-Malaysia Free Trade Agreement. The second thing the government has suggested it will do is sell KiwiBank. This is the government-owned bank set up by the last Labour-led government that, by its own admission in the banking inquiry, has saved New Zealanders about $1 billion in interest, about $1 billion due to competition, and this government wants to sell it. Selling KiwiBank will be a huge disservice to the people of New Zealand and to the companies in the export business hoping to establish a beachhead in Kuala Lumpur.
Point of order, John Hayes.
KiwiBank has got nothing to do with the Malaysia-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement.
Yes, I did. Thank you for that. I did indicate to the member to bring it in, and the member is exactly right. So, come back to the subject.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I'm talking about is this is a free trade agreement between New Zealand and Malaysia. Now, I think it's a very important agreement, Mr. Speaker. I think it has the opportunity to really grow our economy. But what I see, Mr. Speaker, is in terms of really optimising this agreement and allowing New Zealand companies to grow, there are three barriers. There are three barriers to real market optimisation, and they really need to be addressed, or this free market agreement will really not benefit the vast majority of New Zealand companies who could, in fact, be in line to do so well out of this agreement. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, 97% of New Zealand businesses are classed as small to medium enterprises. What this means is they have 19 staff members or less. Very few of these companies can afford to employ full-time international marketing or market development managers, let alone open an office in Malaysia, a country with a different language, legal system and business culture. So what we need is an agency that is our eyes and ears in the global markets. Now tell me, is this government taking any action to help New Zealand businesses make the most of this opportunity in Malaysia? No, they are not. However, let me tell you, Labor understands the value of assisting exporters to get into markets like Malaysia and optimise their ability to take advantage of this free trade agreement. In its last term, the Labor government increased NZTE's funding for market development assistance from $6 million to $54 million. Now there is only just under $10 million available in the International Growth Fund. About 6 months ago, I actually asked the retiring CEO of NZTE if his organisation was New Zealand's international marketing and market development organisation, and his response was, if only. Mr. Speaker, the third point holding New Zealand's economic and export market development into Malaysia back is our current monetary policy. Can anyone in this House tell me how a company can effectively forecast and business plan when they don't know if the exchange rate is going to be at 0.55, 0.65 or 0.75? They can't. They can't, Mr. Hayes, and if you think they can, take your head out of the sand. No wonder we had such poor performance when that man was in MFAT. Goodness me, that's a bloody disgrace. The Labor Party has made a commitment to business to review current monetary policy legislation because we believe it is not beneficial to New Zealand's economic growth. It will not allow companies to take advantage of this free trade agreement and not relevant to New Zealand's economic future. The time is now right for change. Business understands this. Labor understands this. The only people in this country that don't understand this are members on that side of the House. I ask the House, Mr. Speaker, who really is the true party of business? Who is the true party of trade? As I mentioned, every single free trade agreement that's been passed in that government, when that party has been in government, the work has been done by Jim Sutton and the Honourable Phil Goff, the next Prime Minister of New Zealand and the only Prime Minister who knows anything about international relations because he has been at the coalface negotiating contracts on behalf of this country. Mr. Speaker, I do support this bill for a variety of reasons, but please